Imagine a place where every idea, every discovery, every story of mankind was gathered into one single treasure. That was the dream behind the Library of Alexandria. Founded around the 3rd century BC under the rule of Pharaoh Ptolemy I, the library was not just a building filled with scrolls, it was humanity's first attempt to collect all the world's knowledge in one place. Ships arriving in Alexandria were reportedly searched, and any manuscripts they carried were seized. The originals were kept in the library while copies were returned. This practice, according to ancient accounts, made the library the largest archive in the ancient world, possibly containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Yet no one fully agrees on what it really was. Some historians think it was not one giant building, but rather a network of archives scattered across Alexandria. Others believe it was a single mega-library, perhaps holding more than 500,000 scrolls. And the contents? Some say it mostly stored Greek tragedies, Egyptian records, and everyday writings. Others believe it contained texts of lost civilizations, secret sciences, advanced medicine, and forgotten inventions that could have accelerated human progress by centuries. The library wasn't only a place, it was an idea that all knowledge could be gathered, preserved, and shared. And that's why its disappearance is still one of history's greatest tragedies.
The origins of the library are tied to the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who ruled Egypt between 283 and 246 BC. He inherited the vision from his father, Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, but it was under his leadership that the idea began to take shape. The goal was ambitious, to gather every written work in the known world. Ships docking in Alexandria were said to have their scrolls taken to the library. The texts were copied, and the originals were stored, while the copies were returned. This policy made Alexandria a magnet for knowledge, a city where the wisdom of different cultures met and merged. People think the library may have collected works from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and even China. Ancient historians claimed it aimed for at least 500,000 scrolls, though no one knows the true number. There are also stories that Ptolemy II tried to buy or seize entire collections from other centers of learning. One famous tale says he borrowed the original manuscripts of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides from Athens, paid a huge deposit, and then never returned them. Some believe this wasn't only about preserving knowledge, but also about power. Whoever controlled the library controlled access to wisdom, science, and history, which meant controlling the future itself. The foundation of the library was more than an act of curiosity. It was a statement. Alexandria would not just be a trading city, but the intellectual capital of the ancient world.
The question that fascinates people most is simple. What exactly did the Library of Alexandria hold? Some think it was filled mostly with Greek texts, plays, philosophy, and scientific works already well known. Others suggest it stored the records of Egypt's own past, hieroglyphic scrolls, temple archives, and genealogies of pharaohs long forgotten. But there are far more intriguing possibilities. Some believe the library contained lost works of great thinkers, missing plays of Sophocles, unwritten books of Aristotle, and secret teachings of Pythagoras. Others imagine it held medical knowledge far ahead of its time, detailed anatomy studies, surgical methods, even cures for diseases we still struggle with today. There are also stories that it preserved maps of unknown lands, accounts of distant civilizations, and theories of astronomy that hinted at the Earth orbiting the Sun long before Copernicus. People think some scrolls may have been translations from India and Mesopotamia, carrying wisdom about mathematics, astronomy, and spirituality. A few even suggest there were early texts from China, including information about papermaking, gunpowder, or medicine centuries before Europe discovered them. The truth remains unknown. None of the scrolls have survived, but the possibilities make the library feel less like a ruin and more like a doorway that was sealed before humanity could walk through it.
Alongside the known stories of plays, histories, and scientific writings, there are legends that the Library of Alexandria safeguarded knowledge far more mysterious and perhaps even forbidden. Some people think the library held the records of Atlantis or other lost civilizations, describing technologies and cultures wiped out by floods or disasters. Others believe it contained writings of alchemy, magic, and occult sciences, knowledge considered too dangerous for ordinary people. There are whispers that certain scrolls described machines powered by steam long before the Industrial Revolution, or even devices resembling mechanical computers. Ancient inventors like Hero of Alexandria did create small steam-powered toys, so it is possible their work was only a fraction of what once existed. Stories also suggest the library kept secret maps of the world, including lands across the ocean. Some claim it may have had references to the Americas, Antarctica, or other regions thought to be unknown until much later. And then there is the idea of a restricted section, scrolls that only the pharaoh, high priests, or chosen scholars could read. These texts, people believe, might have contained rituals, hidden sciences, or knowledge considered too dangerous to political and religious power. Whether true or not, these legends make the Library of Alexandria feel like more than a collection of books. It becomes a symbol of the possibility that humanity once held secrets far beyond what we imagine today.
One of the most famous events connected to the library is the fire during Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BC. Caesar had become embroiled in a civil war in Egypt, and the city's harbor was set ablaze to destroy enemy ships. People think the flames may have spread to parts of the library. Some historians argue that only the docks and nearby warehouses were destroyed, meaning the main collection may have survived. Others believe the fire reached the library itself, consuming countless scrolls and ancient knowledge in an instant. There are also alternative theories. Some suggest the destruction was exaggerated over time, turning a partial loss into the story of a catastrophic obliteration. Others think it was political propaganda, blaming Caesar for a tragedy that happened later under different circumstances. Regardless, this event marked the beginning of a long decline. Even if some scrolls survived, the library would never recover fully. Scholars believe the first fire may have destroyed tens of thousands of unique works, knowledge lost forever. The question remains, what could have survived? People think some scrolls may have been moved secretly to other buildings or even smuggled out of Egypt entirely, but no one knows for sure.
The story of the library's destruction doesn't end with Caesar's fire. People think it may have faced multiple devastating events over the centuries. One theory suggests that during the reign of Emperor Aurelian in the 270s AD, much of Alexandria was destroyed while suppressing a revolt. Some historians argue that parts of the library could have been lost during this conflict. Another possibility points to Emperor Theodosius in 391 AD, when pagan temples were systematically destroyed. Some believe that if any remaining scrolls were stored in temples or religious buildings, they could have been lost at this time. There are even claims that during the Muslim conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century, surviving texts were destroyed, though historians debate this, noting that many ancient sources contradict the story. People think it's possible that the library's destruction was gradual, happening in stages over centuries rather than a single catastrophic event. Each fire, each war, and each act of censorship chipped away at one of the greatest repositories of knowledge humanity had ever seen. This makes the library more mysterious. We may never know exactly how much was lost in each incident, or what might have survived in secret.
Some historians believe that early Christians played a role in the gradual destruction of the library or its remaining collections. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, pagan temples and centers of learning were sometimes seen as threats or heretical. People think that scrolls stored in temples or religious institutions may have been burned or hidden, either intentionally to suppress pagan knowledge or accidentally during violent conflicts. Some accounts suggest that early Christian zealots destroyed works they considered dangerous or offensive to their beliefs. Others argue that this narrative has been exaggerated over time. There's limited evidence directly linking Christian actions to the library's ultimate loss. Some scholars think that by the time Christianity became dominant, much of the library's material had already been destroyed or relocated. Regardless, the idea of knowledge being suppressed due to ideology emerges as a recurring theme. People think this shows how fragile human knowledge can be, even when preserved carefully. It can be lost if it threatens political, religious, or social power.
One of the most controversial stories about the library's destruction comes from the Muslim conquest of Alexandria in 642 AD. According to later accounts, the Caliph Omar allegedly ordered the remaining scrolls to be burned, saying, "If they agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are dangerous." People think this could explain why so little survived from antiquity. However, historians debate whether this actually happened. Some argue the story appears only in sources written centuries later, possibly as a myth to explain the library's disappearance. Others suggest that even if the event occurred, it may have involved only a small fraction of the library's materials. There are additional possibilities. Some scholars believe that by the 7th century, earthquakes, neglect, and earlier fires had already destroyed much of Alexandria's collections. The Muslim conquest may have merely finished what time had already claimed. This story, whether true or exaggerated, emphasizes a recurring question: how vulnerable knowledge is to the passage of time and human conflict. People think the library's loss was not a single moment, but a series of events shaped by war, politics, and ideology.
Even after centuries, the question remains, could some of the library's knowledge have survived? People think it's possible that fragments were secretly moved before or after the fires. Some scrolls may have been stored in monasteries, private collections, or other cities, carried by scholars fleeing destruction. Others suggest that parts of the collection might have been hidden underground or buried beneath Alexandria, waiting to be discovered. There are also claims that knowledge from the library influenced later civilizations. For example, some believe surviving texts may have contributed to the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars translated Greek and Egyptian works. Others think fragments may have reached Byzantium or Europe, eventually inspiring the Renaissance. Of course, there's no concrete evidence. People think most of the library's material is lost forever, but the idea of hidden or preserved scrolls continues to inspire archaeologists and treasure hunters. The possibility that even a tiny portion survived sparks the imagination.
What secrets might still be waiting to be uncovered?
The loss of the Library of Alexandria represents more than burned scrolls. It's the disappearance of centuries of human knowledge, creativity, and innovation. People think it may have contained lost philosophies that could have reshaped science, ethics, and politics, medical breakthroughs that could have saved countless lives, technologies and inventions that may have advanced civilization by centuries, histories of forgotten civilizations offering insights into humanity's past that are now irretrievably gone. Some scholars argue that the library's destruction set back human progress, creating gaps in science and history that took centuries to recover. Others believe that fragments survived indirectly, influencing later scholars and discoveries. Regardless, the library has become a symbol, a reminder of the fragility of knowledge and the importance of preserving what humanity learns. People think that its loss is one of history's greatest mysteries, leaving endless questions about what could have been.
Beyond the main library, people think Alexandria may have had a secondary collection at the Temple of Serapis, known as the Serapeum. This so-called daughter library is believed to have stored scrolls moved from the main library either for protection or because of space constraints. Some historians argue that when the main library was damaged, the Serapeum may have preserved fragments of knowledge that otherwise would have been lost. Others suggest it was targeted in later attacks, particularly during Emperor Aurelian's campaign in the 270s AD, when much of Alexandria was destroyed. People think the Serapeum may have held rare texts, possibly including philosophical works banned or restricted in the main library, scientific manuscripts too valuable or sensitive to be left in the primary collection, records of Egyptian rituals and lost histories. The existence of the daughter library adds another layer of mystery. Even if the main library was destroyed, some knowledge might have survived elsewhere, hidden from history and waiting to be rediscovered.
One of the most fascinating possibilities is that the Library of Alexandria contained advanced astronomical knowledge, including works by Claudius Ptolemy, the famous Greek-Egyptian astronomer. People think the library may have preserved detailed star maps, planetary calculations, and theories about the cosmos that were centuries ahead of their time. Some even speculate that these texts hinted at concepts resembling heliocentrism long before Copernicus and Galileo. Historians note that Alexandria was a hub for astronomers and mathematicians, making it plausible that the library collected knowledge from Babylon, Greece, and Egypt. Some believe it may have even included observations from travelers in India or China, offering a global perspective on the universe. Others argue that much of this knowledge was lost in the fires, leaving only fragments that reached later scholars. Still, people think that if the library had survived intact, our understanding of astronomy and perhaps navigation, physics, and engineering might have been dramatically accelerated. The idea of lost star maps and cosmic theories adds to the library's legend. It wasn't just about books, but about humanity's attempt to map the universe itself. People think the Library of Alexandria may have contained medical texts far ahead of anything known in the ancient world. Some historians believe it included detailed anatomical studies, possibly based on human dissection, which was rare and controversial at the time, surgical techniques and treatments for injuries and diseases that wouldn't be widely known again for centuries, records of herbs, minerals, and remedies, some of which may have had healing properties lost to history.
There are also claims that certain scrolls described public health practices, hygiene methods, or early vaccines, ideas that could have changed the course of epidemics in the ancient world. Others argue that while some advanced knowledge existed, much of it was rudimentary compared to modern medicine. Yet people think that even small innovations lost in the library's destruction could have saved millions of lives if they had survived. The possibility that ancient physicians once had access to knowledge we can barely reconstruct today adds another layer of mystery and tragedy to the story of the library.
According to some accounts, the Library of Alexandria may have had a restricted section accessible only to the pharaoh, high priests, or select scholars. People think this area could have contained scrolls on alchemy, magic, and the occult, knowledge considered too dangerous for the public. Writings on political strategy or secret rituals which rulers wanted to control carefully. Advanced scientific or mechanical theories that were radically different from mainstream knowledge, possibly considered threatening. Some historians suggest that these forbidden texts were intentionally hidden or segregated, which could explain why very little of such knowledge survived. Others argue that these stories are legendary exaggerations, part of the mystique surrounding the library. Regardless, the idea of a secret section fuels curiosity. People think it highlights how knowledge was sometimes considered too powerful to share, and how control over information shaped history as much as the knowledge itself.
Some people think the Library of Alexandria may have held records detailing the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza and other monumental Egyptian works. According to this theory, the scrolls could have included engineering plans and architectural techniques lost to history, records of tools, materials, and methods that allowed the pyramids to be built with incredible precision, knowledge of astronomical alignments showing how the Egyptians integrated celestial observations into construction. Historians debate how much of this information could have been written down or preserved in scrolls. Others argue that some details were likely passed orally or inscribed in temples, meaning the library may have only had partial records. People think that if such texts survived, they could have revealed secrets of ancient engineering still puzzling researchers today. The possibility adds to the library's legend, portraying it not only as a hub for philosophy and science, but also as a treasury of lost practical knowledge.
People think the Library of Alexandria may have collected texts from far beyond the Mediterranean, including India, China, and Mesopotamia. Some believe these scrolls could have contained mathematical knowledge from India, including early concepts of zero and advanced geometry. Philosophical and religious texts, such as Vedic writings or Buddhist teachings, offering insights into spirituality and ethics. Technological knowledge from China, potentially including early paper-making methods, metallurgy, or even concepts that would later influence gunpowder and other inventions. Historians note that Alexandria was a trading hub, making such exchanges plausible. Scholars and travelers brought manuscripts from distant lands, and people think the library may have tried to translate and preserve as much as possible. If true, this global collection could have made the library the first truly international repository of human knowledge, connecting cultures and ideas that otherwise might have remained isolated for centuries.
People think that the Library of Alexandria may not have been completely neutral in its collection of texts. Some historians suggest that certain scrolls were suppressed, altered, or destroyed if they were considered politically or socially dangerous. For example, works that challenged the ruling Ptolemaic dynasty might have been removed. Philosophical or religious texts that contradicted dominant beliefs may have been restricted to secret sections. Records of foreign powers or technologies could have been kept from the public to maintain political control. Others argue that these censorship stories are speculative, but people think it's plausible given how rulers throughout history have often controlled information to protect authority. This possibility paints the library not only as a center of learning, but also as a political tool where access to knowledge was carefully monitored and manipulated.
Among the most tantalizing legends, people think the Library of Alexandria may have preserved accounts of lost civilizations, including the mythical Atlantis. Some stories suggest that ancient texts described sunken cities and civilizations wiped out by floods or natural disasters. Advanced technologies or philosophies of these lost peoples now vanished from history. Cultural practices and wisdom that could have changed the course of human development. Historians debate whether these references were literal or allegorical, and some argue that Atlantis may have been a metaphor for lost knowledge. Yet people think that if the library truly contained records of vanished civilizations, its destruction represents a loss of humanity's memory, erasing histories we may never recover. The legend of Atlantis adds a layer of mystery. The library wasn't just preserving known knowledge, it may have held secrets humanity wasn't supposed to forget.
People think that not all knowledge from the library was lost. Some scrolls may have been secretly preserved, carried away by travelers, scholars, or priests before or during the fires. Monasteries and religious institutions in Egypt or Byzantium, where texts could have been copied and hidden. Other cities around the Mediterranean, including Rome, Constantinople, and Baghdad, which later became centers of learning. Private collections of scholars, possibly passed down through generations in secrecy. There are also claims that some of these survivors influenced later civilizations, contributing indirectly to the Islamic Golden Age, where Greek and Egyptian texts were translated and studied. The Renaissance, when rediscovered classical knowledge transformed Europe. Even a small fraction of preserved scrolls could have had an outsized impact, shaping philosophy, science, and mathematics for centuries. People think the library's influence may still echo through history, hidden in texts we now take for granted. Even after the Library of Alexandria was gone, its influence may have lingered in unexpected ways. People think that fragments of its knowledge could have inspired scholars and inventors who never knew the library existed, been integrated into religious or philosophical traditions, preserving ideas in disguised or symbolic forms, helped shape the foundations of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, carried forward through translations and commentaries. Some historians argue that the library's destruction created gaps in human knowledge, but the spread of ideas, even in fragments, allowed progress to continue. Others believe that hidden texts may have directly influenced later civilizations, from the Arab world to medieval Europe. The library's shadow reminds people that knowledge can survive even when physical evidence is gone. Its story is a warning and a fascination that what is lost may still shape the future in ways we cannot fully trace. People think the Library of Alexandria might not have been a single, massive building at all. Some historians argue that it was actually a network of archives and smaller collections spread throughout the city. The main library near the royal palace, which served as the central repository, temple libraries, such as the Serapeum, which may have stored rare or sacred texts,
private collections donated or loaned by scholars and wealthy patrons. Others believe there really was a mega library, a centralized structure designed to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls. The question matters because it affects how people interpret the library's destruction. If knowledge was scattered, some of it could have survived, hidden from wars and fires. If it was centralized, the loss would have been far more catastrophic. People think this uncertainty adds to the mystery. The library may have been both a symbol and a real collection, making its story impossible to fully untangle.
People think that the Library of Alexandria may have been deliberately targeted because of the power contained in its knowledge. Some theories suggest rulers feared texts that challenged their authority politically or religiously. Philosophical and scientific works could have been seen as threatening, revealing truths that ordinary people or rulers weren't ready to handle. Competitors in politics or religion may have destroyed parts of the library to erase rival knowledge. Others argue that accidental destruction during wars, fires, and natural disasters is a simpler explanation. Regardless, the idea that knowledge could be suppressed intentionally appears repeatedly in history. People think that if the library had survived intact, humanity might have had access to technologies, sciences, and philosophies centuries ahead of its time. The possibility of deliberate destruction makes the library's loss feel even more tragic. It wasn't just chance. It may have been a struggle over who could control what humanity knew.
People think that not all the library's knowledge was lost. Some scrolls may have been smuggled away or hidden before or during its destruction. Possible scenarios include monks or scholars copying and preserving texts in monasteries or private collections, scrolls taken to Byzantium, the Arab world, or India, where they could have influenced later scholarship. Individual travelers secretly carrying knowledge, leaving traces in manuscripts that survive in translations or commentaries. Some historians argue that very little could have survived, but others point to indirect evidence. Works rediscovered centuries later in the Middle East and Europe may trace back to Alexandrian sources. People think that even a tiny fraction of preserved scrolls could have shaped science, philosophy, and medicine, leaving an invisible legacy that continues to influence the modern world.
People think the Library of Alexandria might have held knowledge of technologies far ahead of its time. Some possibilities include mechanical devices like automata, early engines, or even primitive robotics, inspired by inventors such as Hero of Alexandria. Advanced engineering concepts for construction, water management, and architecture. Scientific theories about electricity, optics, or motion that were not widely rediscovered until centuries later. Historians are divided. Some argue that such claims are exaggerated, while others point out that Hero and other Alexandrian engineers clearly experimented with machines and principles that were centuries ahead of their era. People think that if this knowledge had survived, it might have accelerated the development of technology and industry, potentially changing the course of human civilization long before the modern era.
Among the most enduring legends, people think the library may have preserved texts describing Atlantis or other lost civilizations. Some stories suggest these scrolls contained accounts of sunken cities and civilizations destroyed by floods or natural disasters. Technologies and knowledge from these societies lost to later generations. Cultural and spiritual practices that could have influenced later philosophies or religions.
Historians debate whether references to Atlantis were literal or allegorical, and some claim the tales were meant as moral or philosophical lessons rather than historical fact. Still, people think that if such records truly existed, their loss represents an entire chapter of human history erased, leaving only speculation about civilizations that may have once existed. People think some of the knowledge stored in the Library of Alexandria might have been too powerful or dangerous for its time. Weapons or war technologies that could have changed the balance of power in the ancient world, philosophical or political ideas that challenged existing authority or religious beliefs. Scientific knowledge that, if misused, could have had catastrophic consequences. Some historians argue that these dangers may explain why certain texts were restricted or hidden in forbidden sections of the library. Others suggest it was simply human curiosity and ambition that led to accidents and conflicts resulting in the library's destruction. People think that while the loss is tragic, some of the knowledge may have been too risky to survive at that moment in history, a reminder of the delicate balance between discovery and danger.
People think the library's decline was not just about scrolls burning, but also about the brilliant minds it nurtured. One of the most famous figures is Hypatia of Alexandria, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer who lived in the 4th to 5th century AD. Her murder by a mob in 415 AD symbolizes the loss of intellectual freedom and the fragility of knowledge during times of political and religious upheaval. Historians suggest that Hypatia and other scholars may have tried to preserve and continue the library's work, but their deaths marked the silencing of Alexandrian scholarship. People think that with each scholar lost, not just their own writings, but also the knowledge they guarded or transmitted may have vanished forever. The story of Hypatia highlights a key aspect of the library's tragedy, the human element of knowledge. Without scholars to study, interpret, and pass on texts, even preserved scrolls could be meaningless.
People think that parts of Alexandria, including remnants of the library, may have sunk beneath the Mediterranean due to earthquakes and rising sea levels. Archaeologists have uncovered ruins under the harbor that hint at temples, palaces, and other structures that once stood where the city now lies underwater. Some believe fragments of scrolls or storage rooms could have been submerged and preserved in these sunken ruins. Others argue that the chances of scrolls surviving underwater for centuries are extremely slim, given the fragility of papyrus. Yet people think that even a single scroll preserved by chance could revolutionize our understanding of ancient science, medicine, or history. The possibility that the library, or parts of it, still exists underwater keeps the mystery alive, inspiring modern treasure hunters and researchers to search beneath the waves for lost knowledge.
People think the Library of Alexandria may not have been the mythical all-knowledge repository that later generations imagined. Some historians argue that the stories exaggerate its size and scope, suggesting it was one of several libraries in the city, or that many of the texts were copies rather than originals. Others believe it truly was a grand center of learning, perhaps holding hundreds of thousands of scrolls, representing the greatest concentration of knowledge in the ancient world. There are also debates about the kinds of knowledge it contained. Some say it was primarily Greek literature, philosophy, and science. Others believe it included Egyptian, Indian, and Mesopotamian texts, as well as lost works from civilizations we barely know. People think the uncertainty makes the library even more fascinating. Whether it was smaller or enormous, its story symbolizes human ambition, curiosity, and the drive to preserve knowledge.
Even today, people think the Library of Alexandria is not entirely lost. Modern archaeologists and researchers continue to search Alexandria, both on land and underwater, hoping to uncover remnants of the library or its scrolls. Some efforts focus on excavating sunken ruins in Alexandria's harbor, where parts of the city reportedly sank due to earthquakes. Studying ancient texts and fragments preserved in other civilizations, looking for traces of Alexandrian knowledge. High-tech methods like sonar scanning and underwater robotics to explore areas inaccessible for centuries. People also imagine that even a single recovered scroll could rewrite our understanding of history, science, medicine, or philosophy. The Library of Alexandria remains a symbol of lost human knowledge and the enduring quest to uncover it. Its story reminds us that curiosity, preservation, and the search for wisdom are as important today as they were over 2,000 years ago.